you. Hey, Pastor Toby, do you have the remote? Oh, you're so sneaky. All right, thank you. Okay, so go ahead and keep talking. I'll just move your conversation to this question as we get started. So, share a time when you felt out of place. So you're going to have to gather, at least sit next to somebody. But share a time when you felt out of place. Where were you? What was the setting? What made you feel out of place? So I'll give you a minute or two. Go ahead, find someone to share with, because it's a shared experience. We've probably all felt out of place somewhere. Maybe right now you feel out of place because you're the only one. You're all by yourself, and Pastor's saying talk to someone, and you're like, don't want to do it. Share a time you felt out of place. All right, so kind of circling back. So you think about those times where you felt out of place. Most likely it was because you weren't in a setting that was familiar, or the people around you weren't necessarily familiar. Maybe you didn't know how to act or behave. I felt this way when I went to Liberia. I didn't have a clue. I won't say I felt out of place because I was the only white guy, and there was no way to hide it. It's hard to hide Elmer's glue glow complexion. And I think everyone knew something, but I didn't. So there's a certain handshake in Liberia. They were very gracious to try to teach me, but every guy taught me a different way. And they're like, no, there's how you do it. Okay, and then I'd have to learn again. So it felt a little bit out of place. Next question I want to ask you, so we'll go a little deeper. Think about the current state of our country and culture. I heard some sighs. Do you feel at peace and calm, or are you angry and or anxious? Why? And how is this demonstrated in your life? So how does this show up in what you say, what you think, what you do, how you respond? Ready, set, go. Let's talk with those around you. Not so much what do you think about the current state. Just say, right now I feel calm, or I feel anxious, or I feel angry, or I'm kind of lethargic. Whatever it might be, just say why, and how does it show up in what you do. Go. All right, we'll have some more discussion coming too. I'm not sure, and I'm not going to pull everyone, but I think just coming to an understanding of where you're at and naming it, whether it's like, I'm calm, no, I'm anxious, I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm in Minnesota in November, that's just what I am. Whatever the case might be. Naming that is important. But I do want you, so what we're going to do with Bible study this morning is it's kind of riding in the wake of where we were the past 9 weeks, but also just kind of being honest about where we're at. So we're going to start, we're going to look in Daniel chapter 1. This does not mean we're doing an entire Bible study on Daniel, not that we won't ever, we're just not doing it right now. So Daniel chapter 1, it's on page 719 of the Pew Bible. I have a couple different translations, and it'll be noted accordingly on the slide. So go ahead and open your Bible, Daniel chapter 1. Daniel, one of the prophets, one of the major prophets. If you want to know the difference between a major prophet and a minor prophet, big book, minor prophet, small book. So that's why like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, they tend to be longer than the others. That's the only reason why they're called major. Because the others have longer names like Zephaniah, Zechariah, Habakkuk, all those names. So Daniel's the last of the major prophets. You'll hear a little bit more about his background as we read. So I'm going to go ahead if you want to take a look at the screen. So this is the beginning, how the book opens. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand with some of the vessels of the house of God, and he brought them to the land of Shinar, that's Babylonia, to the house of his God, and placed his vessels in the treasury of his God. Now here, there's a big word. There's a big word here. Anyone want to guess what that big word is? Not Nebuchadnezzar and not Jehoiakim. Sorry, it's not a name, it's an action. Oh, all right, I heard gave and besieged. So it is besieged. I don't know how often you use that word in normal context. Tell your kids, I'm going to besiege your room if you don't clean it. So to besiege, this is not a nice word. It's not a comfy word. It's a thorny word. It's a disruptive word. It's an interruption type of word because normal life no longer exists now. Now, can you relate to the word besieged? Normal no longer exists? Probably. And this is coming from the outside. So, real briefly, the nation of Israel forgot who they were. So if you remember this whole identity triangle, it's very important. So the father tells his children who they are, and who they are shows up in what they do. Well, the children of Israel were no longer doing what they were supposed to do because they forgot who they are, and the reason why they forgot who they are is they forgot whose they were. They forgot the Father, so as a result, they forgot who they are and their identity as his chosen people, and then they didn't act like his chosen people. They wanted to act like all the other nations, like, well, look what they're doing. Can we do that? Can we do that? Can we do that? Can we do that? We'll just make it fit into who we are, or actually what we do, and that then began to warp their understanding of who they were, which then really no longer saw a need for God. So the whole role of the prophets were kind of like, hey, wake up! And not so much gloom and doom. The prophets feel that way, but behind all that gloom and doom is you forgot who you are. You forgot whose you are. And as a result, God acts accordingly and says, okay, we're going to see if we can kind of wake them up. So they're exiled. They're besieged. But what's interesting, and oftentimes this is it's uncomfortable, actually. So besieged is one big word. The other one, the primary actor, the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into Nebuchadnezzar's hand. So it's not so much Jehoiakim was just this ragtag, pathetic leader who didn't know how to lead or raise an army, and it wasn't like, well, Israel's army was weak and Babylonia's army was strong, though that was the case. But the Lord gave them into Babylon's hands. So who's the one running the show right now? The Lord. The Lord's the one running the show. That's important to remember. And so Daniel's writing this, and as he writes it, he already sets the stage. So the stage is set. Here's kind of the setting, what's gone on. And he goes, the Lord gave Israel into the hands of the Babylonians. And that is the primary theme throughout the rest of the book. God's in control. The Lord's the one that gave, and we'll come back to that in a little bit. One thing of note here, when it says that he brought them to the land of Shinar, the house of God, placed the vessels. So those vessels, taking the articles out of the temple, you'll hear more about the temple briefly in the sermon, but the items in the temple, so we're talking like the large golden menorah, the table of the bread of presence, the altar of incense, could be articles of the altar and the tools that the priest would use for sacrifices. Maybe even, sorry, Harrison Ford, Indiana Jones, the Ark of the Covenant. It might have been in Egypt, who knows? I guess it's just lost, just like everything else. It also could have just been taken to Babylon and then like broken down piece by piece. And its gold was used for trade because it was put in the treasury. Oftentimes, pagan temples were also the treasury. It was the bank of the country. Because if you defeated another army, you took all of their gods, which were typically made of fairly pricey material, and you put it in your temple. There's actually a really cool story about that, but we don't have time for it. Just have to read the Old Testament, and you'll see if you find the story that I'm talking about. But then you would use that in terms of like, well, here's how we're going to buy and trade. Or, well, this is really cool. We don't know what to do with this God thing, but we'll melt it down because we could use that gold. And that's how you hoard wealth. So just the kind of in the background. What this is, though, it's a cultural hijacking. The Babylonians are hijacking Judah's culture. Because the epicenter of their culture is what? Well, they think it's their own power, but it's the temple, which is supposed to represent the presence of God. But remember, Israel forgot whose they were, so they forgot who they were, forgot what they're supposed to be doing, and the temple was supposed to remind them of that. It was a constant, even for us when we come into worship, it's a constant remembering and celebrating, and then going out and then coming back to remember and celebrate. Well, now Babylon has taken the epicenter of remembering and celebrating and stripped it bare and hijacked the culture and put it in its own context. What are you thinking? Do you feel this way? Do you feel like sometimes people have hijacked what was rightfully yours, or what you thought was yours? Maybe your ability to define what's truth, what's moral, what's right and what's wrong. I mean, they haven't hijacked the church. Now, and let's be honest, even if they were to hijack this place, guess what? It doesn't change who you are. It doesn't change who we are. Because the church isn't a building, it's the people. We're just blessed to be gathered here. Okay, let's go on. So this is verses 3 to 5. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, gotta love these names, chief of his court officials, to bring into the king's service, King Nebuchadnezzar, some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility, young men, without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that, they were to enter the king's service. Now, following on your sheet, who are those that are impacted? Obviously, it's all of Judea, all of the nation of Judah. Israel has already been exiled by the Assyrians. But who are the primary people impacted here in these verses? Young men, youth. Most likely they're teenagers. Scholars are thinking that the age of these young men, they're probably around 14. Why would you want youth? You might be thinking, I don't know, they could take my youth. Why would they want youth? Why do you think? Impressionable. Ooh, that's a great word. What else? Why would they want youth? So they're impressionable. Right, it's just like, hey, your expiration date isn't for a while yet. Well, we'll keep you. What else? So they're impressionable, they could serve longer. Say what, Don? No tradition. So their concept of how things work is still very malleable. You can form it and stretch it and shape it the way that you like. And if you notice in their description, in Hebrew, so in the Hebrew Old Testament, notice this. If there's ever a long description, that's what you want to clue in on. Because sometimes there's descriptions we really want, like what did Adam and Eve actually look like? How come they don't tell us? And it's because God says, it doesn't matter. But here, apparently this matters. Notice, like, they look good. They're handsome. They're skilled. They're quick. Their potential is huge, through the roof. The best and brightest. That's a description of me? Dan, you're so nice. How come you didn't drop that in one of the pastor appreciation notes? I don't know what to do with that. Yeah. The other thing I want to show you, so in this description where it says the royal family, what's really cool, the Hebrew word there, literally translated, it says the seed of the kingdom. What do seeds do? Seeds are potential for growth. The seed of the kingdom, they're taking the potential for even the well-being and the continuation of Judah. They took it. They hijacked it. Youth are teachable. They're malleable. They're impressionable. And what's the primary action that they do? So there's the youth, and the primary action, they teach them. They teach them for 3 years. For 3 years. Now, they're taught the ways of Babylon in order to serve the king. So some translations will say in order to stand before the king, and it's not so they can just stand there, but to stand before the king means they become advisories. And if you're going to have the primary ruler, and so our democratic mind, you got to, in a sense, take that out, put it over here, put in a more of a monarchy. So the ruler, not England monarchy where you have a parliament. I have no idea if the king has any authority in England. But anyway, this is the guy. His word is what directs and dictates. So if you're going to have advisors that are going to advise him what to do for the benefit of who? That kingdom, they have to know that culture inside and out and have to be there for the benefit of all aspects of that culture. But they're not naturally from there. They've been besieged, hijacked. Literature and language, that means their system of belief. Food and wine, those are customs and a lifestyle. Now, the Hebrews drank wine. They did. And they ate meat. But we'll get to that in a little bit. There were 3 years. For 3 years. Do you know anyone else who was trained for 3 years in the Bible? The disciples. Just going to drop that there. I really don't know how close it's connected, but I'm like, oh, I know that people were trained for 3 years. And depending on the Gospels that you read, some of the disciples were way more teachable and impressionable than others, which are probably like us. Sometimes we're more teachable at other moments than not. But also by teaching, this would lessen their allegiance to their primary culture. Let me say that again. It lessens their allegiance to their primary culture or their culture of origin. This past weekend, we had an opportunity to take some youth to an apologetics conference, so the Stand to Reason Reality Conference. There were almost 4,000 youth gathered for this. 4,000 youth. And one of the statements that was said there was the most important generation is always the next generation. So if we want to, and this is something that I've heard since I was in high school. It's like, it's not the youth will be the church. They are the church now. And I would submit for your consideration that our 2-year-olds are the church now. So often we view it's like, well, what do they have to contribute? If you listen to a children's message and what those kids say, sometimes God speaks a lot clearer through a 5-year-old than a pastor. At other times, you see it's like the nurturing, this is so cool, the way that God set the church up. So the nurturing of other generations. If the next generation, so timeline, if the next generation is the most important generation, in order for us to feed into them, what do we need? We need God to be feeding into us. So it's not just, man, I hope somebody can help them. No, that's us. Not just me, not just Toby. That's us. Because they know what they need? They need to know that you're real. They need to know that you're approachable. They need to know that you have scars. Because I remember growing up and all the older people in church, and that meant anyone older than, like, me. So my parents, my grandparents, I always thought, I'm like, man, they must not do anything wrong. Because it's always, Aaron, you can only have one donut. And me and the pastor's son still tried to sneak a second. It's like they never did anything wrong. So I always thought they were perfect. So my mindset growing up is like, well, to be a Christian means you have your life completely figured out and you never do anything wrong. You guys do anything wrong anymore? Really? Our youth need to see that. Not so much to be like, well, let me tell you about what I did in high school. Like, some of that you might not want to share. But they need to know you're real. And they need you, your presence. We have got some amazing volunteers that will fill in to teach high school right now. So Sarah Kemp's in there. Stephanie Adams is going to be in there. I know the Wickenhausers have signed up. So like throughout the year, we've got different sets of adults to lead in them because I want them to hear other voices than just me and Toby. Toby and I love them. As awkward and gangly as youth can be, they're impressionable, they're teachable, they're malleable, they're honest. They're goofy. It's just kind of like us. But to hear other voices, and for them just to be honest, so they realize, like, so that's another adult. Like, I could talk to you about something, because I don't know what life is looking like. So this isn't new. So if you might be thinking, oh my gosh, what's happening to the youth today? Nothing new under the sun. This is happening already, where culture gets hijacked, and the idea is if we can teach them the literature and the language and the ways of our culture, then we can hijack them from their culture of origin. Which just means we just have to know this and walk alongside them and say, I know what you're hearing, I know what you're experiencing, I know what you're battling. So let's sit with God for a bit. And you'll notice that's what these individuals do as well. Next. So this is a section 1 of the readings, and if you've ever been a reader and this has been your assigned reading as a pastor, I apologize. It's not kind. For those of you that have done it, I believe there's a greater room in heaven for you. I know that's not biblical, but it just, as a pastor, when I see this, I'm like, oh, I didn't call them beforehand. I'm sure they have questions. And if you ever want to read, and this is what scares you, as long as you say it with conviction, nobody's going to say that you're wrong. It's like, oh, wow, maybe that's how you said it, and I've been wrong my whole life. Among those who were chosen from Judah were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief official gave them new names. To Daniel, the name Belteshazzar, to Hananiah, Shadrach, to Mishael, Meshach, and to Azariah, Abednego. And if you can say this, you're speaking ancient Akkadian and English and Hebrew. So, I mean, you are like trilingual here. But here's the point. Names in Hebrew culture are a big, big deal. Names matter a lot. In fact, some of the most pivotal moments in the Hebrew Old Testament is when someone's name is changed. When someone's name's changed, because it means something, and it's a witness to who God is. So they're walking around with and it's like their label says, so here's a cool characteristic about God, Daniel. Here's a characteristic about God, Mishael. So what does all this mean? Glad you asked. So the name Daniel means my judge is God. El, at the very end of the name, El for like Elohim, Dan, so that Hebrew word means to judge, so my judge is God. Denai means my, so I is my, so judge my God. So my God is judge. Hananiah means gracious is Yahweh. So if you happen to know anyone who has some rendition of the name Hannah in their name, in some context even Anna, it's referring to God's grace. It's like our daughter's name Johanna. When you break it apart, it means, it's a derivative of John, but John is a derivative of the Hebrew root for gracious. Yahweh is gracious. Mishael, who is what God is. That's fun. Almost sounds like kind of like a riddle. Who is what God is in terms of, is there anything like God? How cool to have a name that's a question mark? That'd got to be fun to sign your name. It's like your name tag as a little kid. I got to put a question mark at the end of my name. Yes, who is what God is? That'd be fun. And then Azariah's name means Yahweh has helped. Yahweh has helped. And this is kind of a clue. If you're ever wondering when you're reading the Hebrew Old Testament, any name that ends in El, it's referring to something about Elohim, so God. Any name that ends in IAH, it's like Isaiah, Jeremiah, it's referring to Yahweh. Also God. There's two different names for God. Names are a big deal in Hebrew culture, but here's the thing. In any culture, words create worlds. Language is the battlefield. Words create worlds. Which is why there's a name change when these young teenage Judean boys are brought into service for King Nebuchadnezzar. To Daniel, his name is Belteshazzar. Belteshazzar means Bel, protect his life. Bel is a version of the god Marduk. So it's a Babylonian god, or primary god. So Belteshazzar. So notice the change from, we don't want you to know God is God, my judge is God, so it's God who judges me. No. Bel, protect his life. So now your whole protection is going to depend on another god, not yours. And we're going to tell you who that God is. and how he's going to protect his life and what you need to do to make sure that happens. To Hananiah, they give the name Shadrach, and Shadrach means command of Marduk. Command of Marduk. To Mishael, they give the name Meshach. You can hear Mishael, and it's like Mish. It's like, we'll take part of your name and we're going to turn it to this, which is who is like Aku. Not who is what God is. Who's like Aku? Aku is a moon god. And then the last one, Abednego. That was always my favorite as a kid when I had to say their name. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. That sounds like fun. It means servant of Nebo. Think like Captain Nebo. You're thinking Captain Nemo, different. Nebo. And it was a god of wisdom, agriculture, schools, scribes. This also shows up in Nebuchadnezzar's name, so Neb, Neb. So Nebuchadnezzar is even named after Nebo. So in all that, you might be like, well, Pastor, that's really nice, like old dead language stuff. So what? It's a legitimate question. And normally, Toby and I will not just randomly drop this stuff and be like, hey, look at us, we can read an old book. Because that's what you can read the book too. So there's nothing innately special about us being able to give you this information, but we want to show you why. Because names matter in Hebrew. And any culture will create their world with the words that they use. Think about it in terms of like, I don't have enough time to get into this, but the whole idea of what racism is and isn't, it's all a word battle, which reflects how you view the world. So this matters, and we face it even today. In Hebrew, though, so notice that the chief official gave them new names. That's important. I will drop some dead language trivia on you here. This gave in here, another way to say it is, the official set this name on them. And the reason why I highlight this is because that's not what Hebrews do. Hebrews call someone by a name. They don't set a name upon you. So this is intentional as Daniel's writing this, is he wants the reader to understand their true name is still Daniel, Azariah, Mishael, and Hananiah. Those are still their real names. But their opposing culture that's hijacked them has now set new names on top of them. So in other words, they don't own the new name given to them. I understand that's what you call me, but I know that's not who I am. Who I am refers to whose I am. And that will impact what I do, even though you try to call me something different. And here's what's really cool. I did not know this until this past week, and I'm like, my dead language brain is exploding. So you see all those parts in blue? Those are called corruptions. And here's the thing. If their name were to actually be written as the Babylonians gave them, it would sound different. It should be Belshazzar, not Belteshazzar. So as Daniel's writing this, it's like he's tweaking the name just a bit, saying, yeah, that's what they called us, but we're not even going to own it. We're going to tweak it to show we didn't go along with it. They still might call us that. So the K, the K, the Ch, it looks like for us, so Shadrach, Meshach. So that's referring to Marduk. It should say something longer, but they're like, we're just going to shorten it so nobody gets it. And Abednego, it should be Abed-Nabu, not Abednego. So even when they're relaying this history, like, they tried to give us new names. We're not even going to let anybody know the full name that they gave us because it didn't stick. It didn't change who we were. This is what they called us. And the only time you'll see them using these names is in their Babylonian context, which is chapter 3, the fiery furnace. It's the only time you'll hear them called by their Babylonian names because that's the context that they're in. But chapter 1 says, here's who they really are. This is why it's so important for all of us to remember who we are. I hope to get to the point where you are so sick and tired of seeing me do this, that it's imprinted in the back of your mind so that when you are lying on your deathbed, you don't have to worry about what's going to happen because you know who you are and whose you are, and you can say, I got it, because he's got me, because that's who I am and whose I am. When you go out and you feel like your coworker is going to rip you a new one because you're not PC enough, I don't want you to be belligerent towards them. I want you to be like Jesus towards them because that's whose you are and who you are, and that will then impact what you do. This is what we get to teach our youth and our kids, and it's what we get to do together as family. It matters. And we repeat it again and again and again. Say that again, Tim. Well, in Hebrew culture, they would call you by a name, but the words that you hear is they set a name on you. So it's like, we're going to give you a new set of clothes. It's just like, it would be like if someone put a purple jersey on me, which would probably look a lot better on me this year. But I'm not a Vikings fan. I don't hate them, so I don't want to pair it off like, Packers and Hebrews, Babylonians and Vikings. That's not what I'm doing. Just to be fair, I'm not a hater. That being said, I was in Wisconsin the past few days. I did not see a whole lot of green, so I think they're all in mourning. Anyway, we're beside squirrel. We're beside the point. But it's like you set something on them that's not them. That's kind of what it's getting at. Whereas he'd be like, they will call you, and that call sticks. It's like, this is who you are now. All right, so going on. When do you think civil disobedience is necessary? I'm asking you this question not so much for a discussion, but to kind of pull back maybe the past few weeks. Like, we've talked about this. Sometimes maybe it felt like we were beating around the bush. How do we do it? I'm going to remind you of the quote from Martin Luther where it said, but if anything invades the spiritual domain and constrains or like binds the conscience over which only God presides and rules, we should not obey it at all, but rather lose our neck. When our actions are in contrast and in stark contrast to the culture. Sometimes what we believe is in direct opposition to what the world's saying is true. And this also is nothing new. If you haven't been here for the sermon, I'm putting the T in place. I'm going to put the ball on top and Toby will hit it. So it's kind of set up there. In verses 8 to 10, we begin to wonder, it's like, okay, well, where is God in all of this? So Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official permission not to defile himself this way. Now God caused the official to show favor. So even though God gave Judah into Babylon's hands, even in this context, guess what? God's still working. It's not like he kicked the ball that was Judah and just let it sit in the enemy's field. It's like, okay, good luck, guys. No, he goes with them. He has an idea of what he's doing. He is not hands-off. He's very much hands-on. So he causes that official to look favorably towards Daniel. But the official says, I'm afraid that the Lord my king, who's assigned that seat's not supposed to be there, food and drink, why should he see you looking worse than the other men your age? The king would have my head because of you. So in other words, if you don't look good, and if you don't act good, and if you don't learn well, I'm dead. If I don't do my job, I don't only get fired, I get torched. I'll be done. But God's the one who's working, even through those who may not know him. Right hand, left hand kingdom. So Daniel decides, say, okay, guys, then here's what we're going to do. So Daniel basically says, can you just have us, I'm not going to read the whole thing for you, can we just have vegetables and not do the food and wine? The meat and wine. Now, by vegetables, as a kid, this was the not so fun part. Like, the names were fun, but I'm like, oh my gosh, nothing but celery and carrots? Blech. No thanks. I'll just become a Babylonian. What it's referring to here, vegetables, it doesn't mean just vegetables the way we would think of it. It's anything, basically primarily no meat. So this could also include grain. So they could have grains, but basically no meat. And the reason why is that meat could have been used in a pagan temple sacrifice and then put on the king's table, because the king's the best. So king gets the best. And then it's given from the king to them. So they're still getting some pretty nice food. But like, if that was used in a sacrifice, we don't want to be connected to it. And the Hebrews drank wine, so it's not, you cannot use this as a teetotaler and be like, see, really holy people don't drink. Yeah, they did. Read the rest of the Old Testament. Basically, it's like, we just want to show we don't want to be connected with it, but we're still going to do our job. Daniel's basically saying, just let us eat vegetables and see if we look any worse. So in 10 days, now keep in mind 10 days, How many of you have lasted on a diet for more than 10 days? Usually, it's like, I don't see any results for like 10 weeks. So you might be thinking, 10 days? What difference could there possibly be if they're eating vegetables for 10 days? And that's the point. By human power alone, you would not be able to tell a difference. But as the story continues, Daniel, Azariah, Hananiah, Mishael, they look better and in better condition than all the others that were going through the same training that they were, who had meat and wine. How does this happen? It's not mentioned directly, but the only way this could happen is if God's still involved. God does not leave. He's really the one at work. Now, here's a question. Which battle does Daniel choose to fight? And how do you think he comes to that decision? So Daniel could have been like, no, my name is Daniel, Daniel, or whatever the letters are in Hebrew. That's my name. I am not Belteshazzar. I am Daniel. Does he fight that battle? No. Instead, he fights something where it's like, okay, it could be a battle of words. How wrapped up do I want to get in on this? The request for an adjusted diet still allowed them to continue with their training and do what was required without compromising their faith. For you and I, as we're in a culture that seems like it's been hijacked, this is not a science, it's an art. There are guidelines in terms of what's right and what's wrong. But how do we make those decisions? That gray mess that's called ethics. You say situational ethics, or what is our context? Who's involved? This is why Pastor Toby and I have been very hesitant to just give you an answer, because sometimes that might not be the best answer for where you're at. And you might be thinking, well, that's extraordinarily frustrating, Pastor. I'm looking for answers now. Guess what? So are we. And God usually doesn't just say, answer. Now, his truth does not vary. But how we have conversations, he says, I want you to do that with gentleness and respect. This is 1 Peter chapter 3. And in 1 Peter chapter 3, Peter doesn't say, okay, here are your 7 things and your 7 lines and your comebacks. He says, no, I want you to do it with gentleness and respect when someone asks you for the hope that you have. That's it? You give me soft, puffy words like gentleness and respect? Yeah. Remember Jesus? He spoke the truth. But what was the end goal? That the Pharisees would see who they are and whose they are, because that's what God says about them. That the prostitute would know who she is and whose she is, because that's what the grace of God does. So as you respond, that's what I want you to do. And I know that seems like a very simplistic answer. I mean, this is something we will spend the rest of our time. It'll keep coming up, friends. You can't contain it to just one series or one Bible study. It just keeps coming up. We're constantly mindful. This is why that verse in Ephesians say, make opportunity of each day you have, because the days are evil. It's not the days are evil, be scared. That's not the point of that verse. It's be on your guard. Every day you might have opportunity. And when you fail, the grace of God is enough for your failure. You cannot screw up God's plan. You're not that big of a deal. But you are that important to him that he wants to use you to show grace and truth to someone else. So the pressure's off, but the opportunity's on. At the end of the story, the primary actor is God. He's still the one doing everything. And the primary benefactor of all of it is Nebuchadnezzar. Because now Nebuchadnezzar has 4 young men, so now they're probably like just borderline 18, 4 men to advise him, which is consistent with Jeremiah 29, which it says to the exiles, build homes, marry your kids with other Jewish kids, plant gardens, harvest. You're going to be here a while. This is now home. But do things here for the benefit of the culture that you're in, because if it goes well for them, it'll go well for you. Why? So that they might know you. So Christmas is around the corner. Can anybody tell me, and I know they didn't come on Christmas when Jesus was born, but can anyone tell me where the Magi came from? Which direction, north, south, east, or west? Wise men, Magi from the east. In relation to Judea, so this is going to test your geography, where is Babylon in relation to Judea? Where do you think the Magi came from? Good chance they came from Babylonia and Persia, the captors of God's people. Do you think God might have had something figured out then? But it was going to take another 700-800 years to unfold? Yeah. Why? Because how did this whole story start? God gave. God gave. He's still in control, even when everything else seems out of control. On your handout, and I don't have time to do it now, but I want you to look. So this is the rest of the story for Daniel, and you'll see that there are times when they have to stand. Chapter 3, that's the fiery furnace. Do Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego say, no, it's okay, we'll just kind of half bow? No, they stand firm. And it's based on what God's going to do. Daniel, the same thing. Daniel and the lions then. Believe it or not, when we teach the story of Daniel to kids, we only look at chapters 1, 3, and 6 because those are the only stories. The rest are all visions, which are really hard. It's like, here, kids, here's your Sunday school lesson. Mom, I can't sleep. Why? Sunday school! Scary dreams. But these three, so you can get this on the Bible Project. The link is at the bottom of your handout. But those three stories, so notice how it's even framed. I love how the Bible Project set this up. Chapters 1, 3, and 6. This is who they are and how they commit and stay true to who they are, even when it's difficult. And after each story, guess what? God is given glory. The Hebrew God, and the ones who stood firm get promoted. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to have a better job just by standing firm. But God is the one in control. That underlined to Daniel, hope that motivates faithfulness even when it's hard. Last thing I want to leave you with is this. The power of God is on display when the weakness of his people is all that can be seen. So sometimes you might be thinking at the world around you, it's like, it looks like things are falling apart, Pastor. Perfect. Start looking for what God's going to do. It might not be flashy. And I will be honest, it probably won't be in an election that completely goes your way. I think that would limit what God could do. I think he's much more concerned. He's concerned with holistic things like countries and governments and world affairs, but also the individual lives of us as people, who though at times we feel like our culture's been hijacked, we remember who we are and whose we are. Last question on there is for you to take into your week. Depending on I was going to leave time for it, just depending on how much teaching we started a little late. It's okay. But that's something I want you to know. So how does not knowing an outcome, so you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. You don't. But knowing the outcome, and that's God's power and promise, how does that shape how you're going to respond as culture changes? And if you want to know how, read Daniel 1 and 3 and 6. The hope's right there. Let's pray. Father, in our moments of weakness, we pray that you would help us see your strength. In our moments where things seem to be going our way, would you please make us humble and recognize that it is all you're doing? And in times where we are worried or anxious or angry, may you give us that peace that passes all understanding, that guards our heart and our mind, so we might see the opportunity you've placed before us for others to see you and to have their life change just as you are changing ours. In your name we pray. Amen. Blessings on your week. Remember who you are. We'll talk to you later.